You're joining us on this edition of India Tonight. Now, Xi Jinping is all set for his third term as the president of China, unprecedented as it is. In the Communist Party meeting that took place in the last weekend, Xi Jinping gave a 2-hour-long speech and he's reaffirmed his standing tall in the East policy. So as Xi consolidates power within the party and the nation, we're taking a look at what his third term means for India and the world. Let's connect with Maroof Raza. He's joining us, consultant and strategic affairs expert, and we'll also be joined shortly by Rufas Kamau. First, coming to you. Oh, Rufas Kamau is also with us. Rufas, let me begin with you, because some of these Western observers, they believe that global trade would actually help spread liberal democratic values to China. The exact opposite has happened. Xi's rise has actually shown the world that authoritarianism can also spread through economic ties. And of course, in that speech, Xi Jinping has called on nations to secure global supply chains and prevent inflation shocks. How do you read into that?
I think from what we're experiencing, especially considering the current war between Russia and Ukraine, there is a fight for self-sufficiency. So recently we have seen the US resume the fight for microchips, a lot of bans happening, and it's trying to get self-sufficient. So at the same time, China is capitalizing on its best output, and in this case, it's economic manufacturing and also the distribution channels throughout the rest of the world. So I think right now that they're trying to prepare themselves for the next phase of economic production.
Is the entire idea, and if trade is going to be used, Maroof, by China to become a stronger strategic power, do you see them doing it differently from what it has done so far? The expansionist ways that they've really put in place, from whatever Xi Jinping said in that speech, what has been your largest takeaway in terms of that change to use trade and economics, to use itself as a global trade hub? How do you think that has changed from the time that was the last 2 terms of Xi Jinping from what he hopes to achieve in his third term?
I think China has enjoyed some good economic growth, but right now, as we speak, the biggest problem that China is facing is domestic, especially going through the real estate sector. So the current turndown of events, especially with the big real estate companies, has caused a lot of trouble, majorly because about 30% of the wealth in China is tied up in real estate. So he's trying to strengthen the economy and support this particular sector and also the banking sector. And once he does this, people will stop being worried. They'll have better expectations. And somehow he's expecting this to turn into a political positive side of his campaign.
Maroof, what's your understanding from the speech? What were your largest takeaways in terms of its strategic goals? How do you see that changing, altering? Was there anything in it that told you that this is different? The China of the last 2 terms under Xi Jinping is going to be different going ahead?
See, not all the promises that Mr. Xi Jinping is making will come true over the next 5 years, as we've seen in the last 8 years or 10 years. For example, in his coming into power arrangement in 2012, he said by 2020, China would have more or less doubled its own income of individuals or per capita. That was linked to global trade, but that was also linked to certain measures within China. People are blaming the COVID, but it's not that. It's an $18 trillion economy. It's not going to grow at the same rate as it was growing, say, 10 or 15 years ago. But the big takeaways for me are, one, that his biggest priority is going to be economic development and not just muscle flexing. So while he's going to try and get China back into having a stronger economy than it already has, because he knows that will pay for all his other ambitions. 2, he is going to stand firm, remain aggressive on the territorial issues, whether it is with Taiwan or whether it is with neighbors like India. But he's also going to not let up on China's ambitions in the South China Sea and in the larger geopolitical landscape to contest America at every step. The other issue that China is going to focus on is that he wants not just the Chinese economy to grow so that by sheer numbers, it becomes the world's #1 economy. Right now is #2, give or take a little, but he wants common prosperity for his people. And that has been, if you go back to the oldest writings of interviews that people did with him in his earliest stages, that has been his driving agenda, coming as he has into the political fray from the grassroots level. As I mentioned earlier, I think on your show, that he was banished into the hinterland after his father was seen to be assumed to be corrupt. I don't know how far that turned out to be true, but he's risen from the ranks. So he connects with the people on the ground, and he is very keen that all of China prospers. And it is not that capitalist wealth accumulation is left to a handful few. He's been hard on corruption that come from this kind of activity, and the fact that more larger prosperity base will strengthen his own political base and that of the party. So it's not going to be just communist in name, but capitalist in nature, but it's a different model of governance that he has been striving for. He's talked about it all over again.
Yes.
This is what we should be looking at.
That's right.
We have to be
Rufus, the country's export-driven model, China's export-driven model, it seems to have run out of steam in recent times, and you could blame it on its zero-COVID policy, but it hasn't yet fully transitioned to a domestic consumption-based model. So when you look at this shift that Maroof is also referring to, how do you think he's going to position himself as someone who's got a grip on the economic situation as it stands right now? Because one of the reasons why the world is hurtling itself into recession is the slow growth in China. So he's got a huge task on his hands, doesn't he?
Yes, he has quite a huge task. If you consider what's currently happening, a majority of the global central banks are currently tightening, and this is basically killing off the demand, and it's directly affecting the exports from China. However, looking forward and what Xi Jinping is doing, mainly focused on one, interest rates have really remained low, despite other economies like the US, the Eurozone having very high inflation and also rising interest rates. In China, it's a little bit different. The interest rates have remained really low, and this is a good quality environment for a market boom. So what we saw at the beginning of the pandemic, around March, April 2020, a majority of the global central banks lowered interest rates, and then they stimulated the economy. We saw some very strong bull run from 2020 through 2021. So I'm expecting something similar to be happening in China, with much more money being pumped into the real estate sector, the banking sector, and also other sectors of the economy. Interest rates are really low. I'm expecting China to experience some good growth, some good run perhaps in the next 1 or 2 years. But then this will also come with its own challenges of inflation. But I think that's a goal he's willing to handle once he has won the election.
We will keep monitoring the situation as it stands, both economically and strategically for China, because currently, even if you see right now, China spends more on its military than any other country in the world besides the United States. And that definitely has to have a bearing. And whether it's going to come at the cost of economics or not, that remains to be seen as well. But a lot of takeaways from the vision that has been presented by Xi Jinping as he steps into his third term as at the helm of China. Thanks very much, Maroof and Rufas, for joining us with your perspective on this. And this interesting discussion is going to carry on as China, of course, is looked at more closely in times to come. Meanwhile,